That evening, Mary was finishing her monthly check of the dishes in the cafe. It turned out that the customers had broken many glasses again, and it happened very often. It was not a fancy place, so people of different social statuses could come here, and they were not always careful. Of course, when she got a job, she expected to get tips as a waitress. But now she realized that the tips were out of the question. She hoped that at least she would not have to pay her own money for the broken dishes. She didn't know how she was going to live when the baby was born. It was not how she and Paul imagined their future life. Every time the girl was thinking about her husband, tears appeared in her eyes. How could everything coincide like that? A gas leak at the gas station, a smoldering cigarette thrown by someone, and Paul, who was always in a hurry to quickly serve the car of a customer at the gas station. He was at the scene of the explosion that day. She couldn't believe that her husband was gone. There were very few guys who were so caring and calm, and he had distinguished himself at school by being smart and reasonable. She noticed Paul in the 6th grade when she was transferred from another school and had to sit at the same desk with him. But the reason they shared the same desk was because of other circumstances. Paul was the only boy who didn't try to yank the newcomer's thick braid, which she used to wear instead of other stylish hairstyles. From then on they became friends, and then they couldn't imagine their lives any other way. How happy they were when they were fixing up their house. But now Victoria lives there with David because Paul borrowed money from her sister's husband to renovate the house. After Paul's death, David immediately came with a paper proving that Paul took the money from him. So if Mary can't pay the money back and doesn't want to go to court, then she should give him the house. And her sister Victoria didn't even try to protect her sister's family. However, it wasn't surprising. From childhood, Victoria was used to getting the best of everything, and her older sister got what was left. Mary has never understood the reason for such an attitude of her parents. Both of them were their biological daughters. Both of them studied well, and both of them helped with housework. But for some reason, they gave Victoria much more love and care, gave her the best of everything. But they ignored Mary. Why do they treat us so differently? After all, I am their daughter too. Even animals take care of their cubs the same way. But my parents don't notice me. Mary wondered. Of course, there was no one to ask this question. Her father had already died, and her mother was very sick and didn't want to see anyone. These sad thoughts took Mary back to her early childhood. On one of her birthdays, she got a long-awaited doll with a set of clothes that could be changed, bathed in a toy bathtub, and sat on a small chair. And 2 months later, it was her sister's birthday. On Victoria's bed, there was an expensive doll that looked very much like a real girl from the previous century. She had long hair, a velour hat on her head, a plaid woolen coat, and small leather shoes. It seemed to Mary then that this doll from her favorite fairy tale about the Nutcracker came to their house herself. This doll looked so realistic and beautiful. She was afraid to even touch the doll and never dared to ask Victoria to play with it. Her mother always put more oranges or tangerines in Victoria's backpack. They always bought new clothes for Victoria, but Mary had to wear all the clothes after her cousins, and even after the children of her parents' friends. Why did this happen? Their parents weren't rich, but they weren't beggars, and they always bought new clothes for Victoria. But they never bought new clothes for Mary. Paul seemed to be the only one who truly loved her in this life. If he were alive, they would have paid off this debt to David. And then Mary would be expecting a baby not in an old rented apartment, but in their own house. And no one would dare to disrespect her, because her husband always knew how to make people respect both himself and his wife. She can deny herself many things while she is pregnant. But how will she survive when the baby is born? Mary sighed and put the rest of the glasses on the shelf and started to get ready to go home. On the way, she had to stop by her mother's house and bring her groceries because her mom hadn't left the house for the 3rd day already. Mom was in a bad mood as usual. She looked at the groceries and silently went to continue watching her favorite TV show. Mary, who was used to her mother's behavior, started to make a meatball soup. which had always been a favorite meal in their family. When it was time to put the meatballs in the boiling water, the show was over, and her mother entered the kitchen expecting a bowl of hot, tasty soup. "Mom, the soup is almost ready. Sit down at the table." Mary addressed her without taking her eyes off the stove. "How is your health today compared to your father?" "Good," the woman joked grimly and sat down in a chair. "Did you buy fresh pork for the meatballs?" "Of course, fresh, just like you taught me," her daughter replied with a smile. "That's good. The only joy I have left in my old age is to eat a bowl of soup." "Mom, what are you talking about? You're still young. You just need to get treatment, and your health will get much better." "Of course I'll get the treatment, but only if I don't die before then, like Grandpa Edward." "Grandpa Edward died. How did it happen?" "He had lived enough. He didn't need more. He was over 90 years old. He even outlived his son. God granted him a very comfortable death. He was working in his vegetable garden, sat down to get some rest, fell asleep, and never woke up. It happened almost a month ago." "But why didn't you tell me anything? Where was he buried? And why didn't the relatives invite us to the funeral?" "Don't yell at me. He lived just fine without us. So why did he need us when he died?" "To pay for his funeral. If he had given us money when we needed to buy a car, then we would have paid for his funeral. But he didn't give your father a penny. So why would we be concerned about his funeral at all?" "Mom, what on earth are you talking about?" Mary said in shock. "You can't behave like this because of some money, and you can't be offended for the rest of your life. You didn't even come to his funeral. You should have at least told me about it." "Mom, some strangers buried him. It's not right. Grandpa had a family. He had us." "Do you have too much money?" her mother asked angrily. "You bring me ordinary cheap food, even though I raised you, and at the same time you are going to go to your grandfather, whom you haven't seen since you were a child, and feed the whole town at his memorial dinner. Your father and I urgently needed a new car to transport goods, so that we could earn money to feed you and Victoria. But your grandfather decided to use the money to build a new barn for the livestock. So we had to borrow money from Stephen at interest. And when we paid back that interest, your father and I didn't have enough money to feed you and buy you and your sister new toys. So I was paying Uncle Stephen interest all that time." Mary said slowly. "What are you talking about? What kind of interest did you pay him?" Mom said indignantly. "When we were kids, you bought toys, clothes, and treats for Victoria, but not for me. Victoria always had a lot of everything. Expensive toys, new clothes, and treats in her backpack. I had to wear used clothes given by your friends. I had cheap toys, and only one apple in my backpack. Mom, maybe I'm adopted." Mary finally dared to say something that tormented her for so long. "Do you think I never noticed that you always loved Victoria more than me?" Her mom got angry at her daughter's words, but continued to defend herself. "Why are you complaining about your life? Yes, maybe we gave Victoria more attention and care, but she is younger than you. When I was pregnant with your sister, I was constantly examined by doctors because there were problems with her health, and I almost died in childbirth. It's understandable that a weak child requires more attention from the parents. So don't take offense at us. Does she live in my house because she was born a weak child, too?" Mary couldn't hold back the resentment she had accumulated over the years. "You know, I could buy you more expensive food, but I don't have the money to do that. I have to pay the rent." "You shouldn't have borrowed the money," her mom replied rudely. "Don't you have a place to live now?" "I don't," Mary said glumly. "In 2 weeks I have to either pay for next month or move out of the apartment. But I don't have any money." "Did Grandpa make a will? Did someone inherit his house?" "He didn't. He was going to live until 100 years old. And he didn't have any health problems. Now no one lives in that house. Why do you ask?" "Mom, can I at least stay in Grandfather's house since Victoria and David live in mine?" "Talk to Victoria about that. Mom muttered and walked off to her room, making it clear that the conversation was over. Mary couldn't stop thinking about that house. In any case, soon, she would be fired from the cafe. When she was hired, she was warned that there would be no maternity leave. Soon her belly will get bigger, everyone will know she's pregnant, and she'll be fired. So she will have nowhere to live except at her grandfather's house. She has to quit her job immediately and go to that small town before Victoria and David get there. Now the house doesn't belong to anyone, and Mary won't be able to register it in her name. But her sister won't be able to kick her out of there. The girl will not pack her belongings for the second time, as it was when she was kicked out of her own house for debt. Enough. It's time to start a new life, without the help of relatives. At the cafe, her boss asked about the reason she decided to quit, immediately paid her last salary, and the very next day Mary was already standing with her suitcases outside the house with the door locked. "Well, hello, my new house." The girl said, "Will you let me be your new owner?" Hearing no objection, Mary opened the wooden door with her key and entered the house. That was how a new phase of her life began. Life was immediately filled with new challenges. The locals were unfriendly to her, believing that she had deliberately not come to her grandfather's funeral in order not to pay for it, and only showed up when it was time to get the inheritance. The vegetable garden was already overgrown with weeds. There was almost no harvest of vegetables, and there were no livestock either, and it was impossible to find a job in that small town. Mary already began to panic, anticipating a starving existence. But suddenly her neighbor Mrs. Tyler came to the rescue. Unlike other inhabitants of the town, Mrs. Tyler was sympathetic to the hard-working and modest girl. "Honey, you will not survive like this," she said to Mary when she saw the girl looking for potatoes in the vegetable garden. "Let's help each other out. I have a small farm and some livestock. I'm not young anymore, and I don't have the energy to do everything. The cow gives a lot of milk usually. I sell it at the small market near the highway. But sometimes I just don't have the strength. Why don't you sell it? It would be beneficial for both of us." Deal. Of course, Mary was happy to accept the offer. It was her chance to survive. So the very next day she was standing at the market with bottles of fresh milk, a bucket of sour cream, and delicious cottage cheese. Carol was standing next to her with a tray of fried and baked pastries, and Grandpa Kevin was selling fresh fish. "Grandpa Kevin, look, Mrs. Tyler has a personal salesperson now." Carol winked. "We didn't even notice that she became a big boss with employees." "Shut up, Carol." Grandpa Kevin looked at her reproachfully. "Watch yourself and your sales, not other people's sales. Everyone's gotten so sensitive," Carol said resentfully, and turned to Mary. "Why did you decide to sell other people's goods at the market? Don't you have anything to eat? Did you think your grandfather's inheritance would be wealthier?" "I didn't think about the inheritance," Mary answered calmly. "I had no place to live. That's why I came to this house." "Haven't you found a man in the big city to live with?" Carol continued to bombard her with questions. "My man died, and my house was taken away for debts. Is everything clear to you now?" Carol shut up and looked angrily at the driving cars, and Grandpa Kevin shook his head disappointedly. By lunchtime, Mary had only 1 liter of milk left and was about to go home. Carol, who had been silent all this time, suddenly put the 3 pieces of cherry pie in a paper bag and put them in Mary's bag. "Take it. I don't think your fridge is full of food," Carol said, and immediately turned away. "That's not enough," Grandpa Kevin noted, and handed the girl 3 fish that were still wiggling their tails. Mary could hardly hold back her tears, thanked the locals, and hurried home to avoid crying in front of them. From then on, her relations with the locals got better, and her life slowly began to improve. The only thing the girl was seriously worried about was the term of her pregnancy. Winter was approaching. She couldn't imagine standing in the cold in the last months of her pregnancy selling milk. And what would she do later when the baby was born? Mary had no idea what would happen to her, but she hoped she would find a way out of the situation and prayed every evening in front of old icons. One day, Mary noticed a familiar red Volkswagen among the cars on the road. It was David's car. The girl shuddered, hoping they wouldn't recognize her. But the car braked sharply. The front door opened and she saw Victoria. Victoria looked at her sister unhappily and turned to her. "So this is where you live? We couldn't find you," she said, looking at Mary intently. "You look like a poor country girl." Mary lowered her eyes shyly, and Carol, who was sitting next to her, stared angrily at Victoria. Without noticing it, Victoria continued, "From what I see, you have a pretty good life here. You have milk, sour cream, and cottage cheese. But who will pay your debts? Also, legally, I am also grandfather's heir, which means half of the house belongs to me." "What debts?" "You took away my house," Mary said quietly. "What else do you want from me?" Victoria had no time to answer her sister, for the bold Carol stood up abruptly, squinted her eyes, and addressed her. "Hey, lady, why did you come here? Do you want your grandfather's house? Where were you when we were burying him like a homeless man? Why didn't you come to his funeral? Why didn't you pay for it? Were you abroad on the beach, enjoying the sun? Leave now, or I'll pull out half your hair and scratch your face with my nails." Carol began to approach Victoria so threateningly that Victoria hurried to her car shouting, "Crazy people." Victoria got into her car quickly and drove away. "Don't be afraid, Mary. She won't come here again," a satisfied Carol assured the shocked woman. Gradually, Mary made the house cozy, decorated it, and even managed to fix the old boiler before winter. Grandpa Kevin helped her. He did everything properly and refused to take money from her. Mary, who grew up without car and affection, had tears of gratitude in her eyes. She didn't expect such kindness from strangers, and soon the solution to her main problem showed up. On one of the gloomy autumn days, a black SUV pulled up to the market, and a slender man in a bright sports jacket got out. After buying a huge bag of apples, he approached a small counter with dairy products. Mary had already sold out the milk and sour cream, and there was only cottage cheese, butter, and homemade cheeses left on the table. After trying a piece of cheese, the man winked at Mary and said, "I'll buy everything you have left. How much money do I have to pay?" "Oh, you wouldn't be able to eat that much. The food might go to waste." Mary laughed. "You'll only waste money." "But I'm not gonna eat it alone," the cheerful customer said. "There are a lot of hungry employees in my office, and they will eat it all very quickly. You know, I'm getting tired of watching them eat junk food. Let them get used to eating healthy. Besides, you should go home too. You're freezing cold. By the way, how did you end up here? You don't look like a country girl." The stranger looked at the girl understandingly, and his smile was so sincere that Mary told him the whole sad story of her journey from the city to this town. "You've had a very hard life," the man said, scratching the tip of his nose. "Come on, pack your bags and come with me." "Where?" Mary stared at him in confusion. "I need a nanny for my daughter. The previous one quit, and I haven't found a new one yet. And it's very hard for me to handle everything without a woman in the house. I'm a widower, and I have a child, so I need a nanny and someone to help with the housework. It would be a win-win for both of us. My daughter would have a nanny, and you could earn money, and you wouldn't have to pay rent." "But I can't." Mary shook her head desperately. "Why not?" the stranger said warily. "I can see that you're a nice, educated girl." "I can't because I'm pregnant," Mary confessed. "You can't see my belly yet, but pretty soon I won't be able to do any hard physical work." "We'll figure something out," the man said calmly, and finally introduced himself. "My name is Christian. Get in the car. It's time to go." With these words, he helped Mary to get into his car. The big beautiful house met the girl ambiguously. A 5-year-old girl with snow-white hair named Sophia was very happy when she saw her new nanny, smelling of milk. But Alice, a gorgeous brunette who turned out to be Christian's fiancée, only said unhappily, "Why on earth did you bring this girl into the house? I told you to find a professional nanny through the agency. They have too many conditions and requirements. And since you and Sophia couldn't become friends, this problem had to be solved urgently." Christian didn't go into details and took Mary's suitcase to the guest room. The girl immediately became friends with Sophia, the kind and sincere child who needed simple and warm communication, immediately liked Mari. Together, they built fabulous Lego castles, filling them with little inhabitants and making up a life story for each of them. They made funny and kind animals out of plasticine and organized doll balls, dressing them up in lush dresses. And in the evenings the girl read bedtime stories to Sophia. Mari, who didn't have anyone to play with when she was a kid, was immersed in fantasy as deeply as a little girl. She tried to avoid Alice, seeing that her presence in the house irritated her. For some reason, it seemed to Mary that Alice would certainly try to get rid of her, and her premonitions were right. One autumn day, Mary and Sophia were walking in the backyard of the mansion, enjoying the last rays of autumn sunshine. After a long bike ride, they first played with leaves, then built sand houses, and it was time to go home. But they didn't feel like it, so Mary suggested making a wreath out of fallen maple leaves. Sophia was running around under the trees and picking leaves. The new nanny was so focused on weaving that she didn't notice Alice come up to Sophia and whisper something in her ear, pointing to the open gate. Sophia laughed, nodded merrily, and quickly cycled her bike out of the gate. The gate slowly closed behind her, leaving the girl outside without a nanny. Mary continued to weave the wreath until she found that she was out of leaves. She looked around and was horrified to find that Sophia was not there. Mary was terrified. Bad thoughts immediately came into her head. She started looking for the girl, running around the huge yard, then stopped by an old tree and thought that maybe Sophia had run out into the street. Mary looked outside and saw Sophia standing at the gate, looking around in confusion. "Sophia, come here, sweetie. There's a road. You can't be here," Mary shouted and rushed over to the girl. When she reached her, she hugged Sophia tightly. "Honey, why did you run away? Anything could have happened to you. It's not safe here," Mary repeated through her tears. "I went to meet Daddy from work, but for some reason, he wasn't outside," the girl said disappointedly. "Daddy? What made you think Daddy would be outside?" "Alice told me that Daddy was coming and would be happy if I met him at the gate. I cycled out, but he wasn't here for some reason." Mary felt a shiver go down her spine. It was the first battle of an undeclared war, and she had lost it. How many more such battles would they have in the future? And who would be the winner? And it wasn't just about Murray. As it turned out, Alice was willing to risk the life and safety of her future husband's child. The girl had no choice. She had to accept the challenge and fight as long as she could stay in this house. She had to protect the child. Mary returned to the mansion, pretending to be calm. She changed Sophia's clothes and went down to the living room, internally preparing herself for unpleasant conversations. When the girl saw her father, she ran to hug him and said, "Daddy, you finally arrived. Why weren't you here earlier when I met you outside the gate?" "Sophia, when was that?" Christian leaned over to his daughter in surprise. "When the new nanny was so busy weaving a wreath that she let the child go outside the gate where anything could happen to her," Alice stated coldly. Christian slowly straightened up and looked intently at Mary. She trembled, seeing how much rage was in that gaze, and went numb, losing all the words that she wanted to say. But the situation was saved by Sophia. "You're evil," the girl said, and almost attacked Alice with her fists. "You were the one who told me that Daddy was outside and that I had to meet him there," she said. Christian slowly shifted his gaze to Alice. Apparently, she felt uncomfortable and said grudgingly, "You should have checked this nanny's background before you hired her." After these words, Alice hurried up to her room. Then there was a tense pause at the table. "I will eat dinner in my office," Christian said nervously, and Mary realized that this strong and usually calm man was now struggling with a storm of conflicting emotions. "We will eat in our room, too," Mary replied quietly, and taking Sophia's hand, went up to the girl's room. The girl couldn't sleep at night. The thoughts in her head wouldn't let her calm down. Mary was sure that this was not just a family quarrel. Alice didn't get what she wanted and would take more drastic action, which could have very bad consequences for everyone. There was something ruthless about this beautiful woman, so Mary decided to watch her more carefully, even if it meant spending less time with Sophia. All the following days, Mary tried to organize her activities with the child in such a way that she could see what Alice was doing, but she didn't notice anything strange about her. Perhaps Alice decided to stop for a while or became more careful in her actions. She was nice to Christian, sweet with Sophia, and ignored the new nanny. Mary had a lot of suspicions and thoughts that she could not explain, and of course, she couldn't prove anything. 3 weeks later, she overheard Alice's phone conversation as she was picking up toys scattered among pots of lush tropical plants. Because of the large size of the bushes, no one who passed through the living room could see her. "Sam, don't make me nervous. I'm already very tired." It wasn't easy to convince Christian to schedule the wedding on a specific date. "Anyway, I can't talk right now. Call me at 2 o'clock today." Is Alice cheating on her fiancé? A thought immediately popped into Mary's mind. Probably yes. She doesn't love Christian. I immediately understood it when I first entered this house. She's just using his money. Of course, it's bad to listen to other people's conversations, but it's much worse to deceive Christian. Mary began to think about how she could overhear the conversation without Alice seeing her. Fortunately, the appointed time was the same time as Sophia's afternoon nap. I hope Alice doesn't go anywhere, because there may not be another opportunity to find out everything, Mary said to herself. Her heart began to beat even faster. Luckily, Alice simply went out into the garden, knowing that the gardener was definitely not there, for he had already finished all the seasonal work. Mary followed her carefully. It was autumn, and the bare trees made it impossible to get close enough to hear the conversation. But Alice had made the fatal mistake trying to hide from everyone. She had chosen a bench hidden among the perennial junipers, and this juniper allowed Mary to approach Alice from the opposite side and turn on the recorder. "Sam, I don't understand you. Where do you spend all the money I constantly give you? You lost it at the casino again. Do you think I like being here, between the annoying child and the stupid nanny, pretending to be the loving fiancé? That nanny got suspicious, and she's been following me around. And I have to get all the papers on time. You know Pierce will eliminate anyone if he doesn't get what he wants. Okay, don't cry. I'll give you one diamond ring. That should be enough to cover expenses. I'll go to the beauty salon tomorrow, and I'll take the ring with me. And remember, this is the last time I'm helping you. Enough talking. I'm freezing on this bench. I'll see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. outside the beauty salon. Kisses." With these words, Alice ended the call and, shivering from the first frost, hurried back to the cozy warm house. Mary kept lying on the ground, not feeling the cold, and there was only one foolish thought in her mind. What the hell is going on here? I have to get out of this mad house as soon as possible. Finally, feeling cold from the chilled ground, Mary got up and sent this recording of the conversation to Christian without hesitation. In the evening, Mary put Sophia to bed, then ran to her room and locked the door. Christian would be home from work soon, and she didn't realize what the consequences of her action would be. Soon, the front door slammed, and quick footsteps headed for Alice's room. The quiet conversation quickly turned to loud fighting. A frightened Mary listened to Christian's shouting and his fiancée's excuses turning into squeals. Mary realized that Pierce was Christian's main competitor. With the help of Alice, he wanted to get confidential information or any dirt about Christian's company, and used such a dishonest way to achieve his goal. Little Sophia woke up because of the increasing noise and ran to the nanny's room in fear. The little girl, who didn't yet understand anything about adult relationships, quickly realized what was going on and asked, "Mary, is Daddy kicking wicked Alice out of the house?" "I hope so, sweetheart," Mary replied, and hugging Sophia, began to stroke her snow-white curls with trembling fingers. Soon there were running footsteps on the stairs, accompanied by Alice's voice. She cursed the whole house and the people who lived there. And then the front door slammed loudly, and there was such a deafening silence that Mary felt dizzy. It seemed that all the worst things were over, but apparently, the stress had taken its toll, and Mary suddenly felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen. Why did the contractions start so early? It's almost 2 months before labor. She whispered and started to move towards the door, but when she opened it, she lost consciousness. The last thing she heard was Sophia's terrified scream, "Daddy, save Mary. She needs help." The darkness vanished as suddenly as it had come. Mary realized she was lying in a hospital room with a flat stomach. "Where am I? Where my baby?" Mary tried to get out of bed anxiously. "Dear, don't get up," the midwife gently stopped her from standing up. "Everything all right? The boy was born prematurely, but he's perfectly healthy. You're fine too. We've stopped your bleeding. It's good that your relative helped. He donated blood for you. You are lucky because your blood type is very rare." "What relative?" Mary asked in confusion. "I only have a sister and an elderly mom." "The guy who brought you here. Didn't you know that? The blood test showed that you're blood relatives." Mary's eyes went dark again. How many more new things would she learn? But there was no strength to think about it now, and she fell asleep. But a call from Christian woke her up. "So, sister, how are you doing? They told me you're already fine. Have you decided on a name for my nephew yet?" "I don't understand. How could this happen?" Confused Mary asked. "It's very easy to explain." It was clear from Christian's voice that he was nervous too. "I grew up in an orphanage, but I always knew I had a little sister and that she was adopted by someone. When I grew up, I tried to find you, but I failed. When I donated blood for you at the hospital, the doctors said that our rare blood type and phenotype matched, and then I did a DNA test and got a positive result. Your mom also immediately confessed that they adopted you, and then after they adopted you, Victoria was born. By the way, she's very sweet but spoiled." Mary was silent, swallowing the tears of joy. She couldn't believe she'd found a relative. And she suddenly realized that she was right. Her parents did love Victoria more. But now she understood why, and all the resentment disappeared. "Why are you silent? It's time to pick a name for the baby." Christian tried to fill the awkward pause. "Yes, you're right." Mary smiled through her tears. "I'm going to name my son Paul." It was his father's name. They celebrated the return of Mary and little Paul from the maternity hospital with warmth and joy. Christian and little Sophia were waiting for them at home, and Christian also invited his close friend Michael. Also, despite all the previous offenses, Mary decided to invite Victoria, who didn't expect forgiveness and felt very uncomfortable. That day, Mary noticed that Michael didn't take his eyes off of her. When Mary went to her bedroom to feed her baby, someone gently knocked on the door. It was Victoria. She was confused, sad, and had tears in her eyes. "Why are you crying?" Mary was puzzled. "Has something happened?" "Yes, something happened." Victoria tried to talk softly so as not to scare the baby. "I realized that I made a big mistake." "What mistake?" Mary didn't understand what she was talking about. "The biggest mistake of my life," Victoria said. "I was a terrible sister. I almost ruined your life. I didn't stop David from kicking you out of your own house for debt. He didn't really listen to me, but still, it was my fault. And now we've lost that house David lost at gambling. I tried to do something about his addiction, but I failed. He lost the house, the car, and all of our savings. We've lost everything, but we still owe a lot of money. Mom is already very sick, and when she dies, I'll have to pay off the debt with her apartment. Will you let me live in my grandfather's house? I mocked you then, standing on the road. And now I beg you to let me live there. Victoria said and started crying loudly. Victoria, enough. Don't cry. Mary tried to comfort her sister. There is no reason for you to go to a small town. I will talk to Christian. I think he likes you, and he won't refuse you to live here. But of course without David. I've already broken up with him a long time ago. Victoria said as she calmed down. He's hurt me too much, so forget everything that was in the past. Now you can start a new life. Mary hugged Victoria. Let's go to the table. Paul is already asleep, and the men are probably waiting for us. Mary, have you really forgiven me? Victoria looked at her sister with her eyes full of tears. How can you forgive me after everything I've done? I forgave you a long time ago, Mary smiled affectionately. We are humans, so we have to forgive each other. The sisters went to the living room, and the men's gazes met them. Mary saw Michael's embarrassed look, and Victoria caught Christian's interested and intense gaze. 6 months later, they celebrated 2 weddings on the same day, just as the 2 sisters dreamed.